When John Shulman was arrested in Pittsburgh, he said there must be some other explanation. He was telling the Pittsburgh detectives what he knew they wanted to hear. And he had said it so many times before when it came to things I reported about him, such as my suspicion that he had committed mail fraud, that he was behind the reckless driving incident at Kelly Elementary School, that he knew all about Gail Burson, that his essay on mayors in plague time was a slap in the face because he was inside the Zionist circles who had written the letters of Gail Burson. In 1994, I had issued a mutiny in Carnegie Mellon media calling for an investigation of the premise that the Zionists were out to avenge Auschwitz. Owen Jones knows that about me. I don't like to step on the toes of the sandbaggers because, like them, I believe it's the worst of all worlds when children are killed gratuitously the way they're being in Gaza. I wouldn't want the welcome that's extended to my attempts to be poignant and dissenting towards the culture that has allowed this gruesome spectacle to be shut down because of my research. But it does identify them as sandbaggers because they are perversely in the shoes of the media that they're now warning us about when it comes to Shulman and Gail Burson. Sabine women is something I refer to disparagingly about the Kennedys, but if you go to see the paintings about the Sabine women, the Roman Empire at the Louvre, they're not painted disparagingly. In fact, it's humanized, and women made peace with their abductors and conquerors who became their husbands and they bore them children. But it can be used disparagingly, and sometimes I do liken the sandbaggers to the Sabine women. I'm trying to answer the question why I can't answer. Someone who wanted to know what I knew about the Supernova Massacre and what it really means. I had said that the Palestinians were not in on it, that it was Egypt. And like the rave being moved, the massacre was moved from the outskirts of Palestine and Gaza in so-called Israel into Gaza itself. That the Supernova Rave Massacre was instigated deliberately to raise Gaza, which is clear. But when it comes to why I can't answer that, why I can't go into how I know that, the reason is also clear. What I have to say is very hard to believe. And Owen, by now, knows, as does Galloway, that the evidence for what I have to say is on my side. So they're going against the evidence, which is on my side, for reasons that are pretty clear. They want the fact that it's hard to believe to remain the point of departure. If you look at a chronology from the past to the future, at any time where it becomes recognized that the facts are on my side, it becomes a little bit less hard to believe. They don't want that. They want to be protected by how hard it is to believe. It begins with the idea that I had some relationship with Reagan. I was very resistant to that idea myself. Reagan is somebody who the sandbaggers like to cite as someone who was more cautious about Israel because he chose words that were reassuringly realistic about Sabra and Shatila, the massacres of Sabra and Shatila. But it's hot wiring around the other things that are known about Reagan. Additionally, people say there's more important things now, like Extinction Rebellion and the climate change Congress of the parties, the overheating of the earth. Well, it's strange in a way that Greta Thunberg showed up with jewelry bedecked Ringo-looking groupies and Arnold Schwarzenegger singing the praises of Reagan. Back when Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter, I wrote to him and asked him his ecology program. And he sent me a list of priorities with ecology at the bottom. He believed in a healthy environment so long as all Americans got a piece of the expanding pie. So you have to believe that Reagan's tax and spend militarism was somehow in the direction of sustainable development when he axed Carter's solar energy bank. What we have in a situation with me, it's easy to prove. For example, Reagan's Federal Emergency Management Agency attorney group from the University of Pittsburgh included an Israeli figure, a protege of Nasrallah named Miles Kirshner, who had me in D.C. the day Reagan claims he was shot. Reagan came out and waved to me the night before. And they gave me a brochure that reads, "There's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes." Well, that proves reasonable doubt that it was a Hollywood magic show, that only James Brady was really shot. James was shot in the brain by John. And since they tried to trace the letters of Gail Burston and then misconstrue them as somehow my doing, which allegedly are the script about John Lennon's homicide, but really it was when he stepped out. You have to wonder if it's a double fantasy at work. So there's a parallel between Hamas and John Lennon, because the true victims of Hamas are the Palestinians. The true victims of John Lennon are the AIDS victims. But the circumstances and the trickery have people siding with John Lennon and siding with Hamas as though they're being represented by their own killers. And they're celebrating their demise in the name of this messianic presentation. Everything explains itself from there. Reagan was a partner of McCartney. Reagan and McCartney could virtually be the initialism for Ram, McCartney's first record. And it was represented by Yoko Ono's attorney, Amanda Harcourt, who got in touch with me for Peter Gabriel and cased me and set me up. And by Oliver Stone's attentions and Ringo Starr. Once the bank of celebrities closes ranks, it becomes a United Artists statement. And it was all to protect John Schulman's partner, Leslie Sonetta Katz, a partner who the script was written about John Lennon and Leslie. The script was not really about me. It was about John Lennon and Leslie. John Lennon came to protect spiritually Leslie from Jimmy Crary's jealousy. That's the story that they told. And they made sure it was as convincing as they knew how. Through an Attica State prison psychiatrist, Bernard Wattenmaker's special attentions. Now you see the index Wattenmaker and supernova. You see, the supernova was a metaphor. There was a rave massacre in Seattle, too, by a MAGA type. That's not lost on me. The supernova massacre was about the AIDS attack. It was a metaphor. And they're just sweeping poor people off, get them out by Friday style. Because the tax and spend liberalism that believes they can build a sustainable welfare state wants to tax the rich, and we can't have that. If you look at the 60s generation, you'll see there was an intellectual circuit of places like Berkeley who evolved into the 80s. Marshall McLuhan's Media is the Message was popular. And there's nothing about theology of the media in that book, nor is there anything about theology in the subsequent texts that went around on the margins in the 80s among the same intellectual circuit, which included J.G. Bennett's Guide for the Perplexed. But if you put together J.G. Bennett's Guide for the Perplexed with Media is the Message, you do get the picture of a theology of media. And when Gail Burstyn wrote to me, she dwelled on the idea of Interview with a Vampire. Greg Carl subjected the persona, meaning me, to successive degradations of the X motive, meaning girls seduced me, got themselves into trouble, and went to the clinic. And now I'm the vampire in the theology of media. And if you were to look at the way that the Guide for the Perplexed, the Medium is the Message, explain the circumstances of how they're operating, I liken it to Sabine women. Sabine women is not necessarily disparaging, but they can be thought of as disparaging. What if you had something like one of Hitler's savants talking to his nephew and telling him about the massacre of the Jews, and he wasn't accepting it? You would get something like a Guide for the Perplexed, a sort of there, almost like the Screwtape Letters, where Uncle Screwtape tells Wormwood, his junior, various things about the nature of reality. Or Oriana Fallaci's Letter to a Child Never Born. This is structured into the package. Cliff Robertson flew above the World Trade Center in a private plane on 9/11. Diamond Gullis is standing in a photograph of the World Trade Center holding a stiletto. She's the tie to the AIDS attack. Foucault met with the Ayatollah Khomeini. Son Strub was outside the Dakota. All these are explanations that show that the supernova rave was as metaphorical as the anthrax. Cliff Robertson starred in PT 109 as JFK, but more importantly, he starred in the premiere episode of The Outer Limits. Remember, we now take control of your television set? This gets very poignantly like Sabine women when it comes to the Kennedys. In the premiere episode of The Outer Limits, Cliff Robertson obsesses over the cathode ray tube in the television set. And so it's alien intelligence or life forming. It's the embryonic state. And that was delayed for Kennedy's state funeral. So the whole thing is a tapestry of conquest. And they say they're there because they're selling the idea of evidence of things unseen, that we need a fourth dimensional man to play God with all of the forces structured to choose to sweep off the poor and build a paradise. We need godlike powers for Trump or whatever you call him. And they've been working this since Fayum days, when Gabriel D'Annunzio was partnering up with Mussolini and D.W. Griffith, and with Spansky, who was sort of an uncle to J.G. Bennett, part of the circuit of fourth dimensional psychologists behind God for the Perplexed. He was in the New Age newspapers in the 1919, 1918 times when Mussolini and Griffith were getting it on. They came up with this idea of a fourth dimensional. Houdini was very famous then. And they got the idea for pulling a Lazarus, a blaze from the cinders, a back from the dead, a Casper, as Reagan called his Secretary of concentration camps. And when he was pulled his Hollywood show, his Pentagon Disney self-inflicted production as the master of Hollywood, he had a Secret Service agent named Unruh, like Rue Morgue, undead. This idea of being back from the dead, Casper, blaze from the cinders, the Phoenix, Lazarus, comes out in Franklin Graham's book when he has a guy named calling himself Hitler in his chaplain course, and he wants to be called Lazarus instead of Hitler. No more Hitler, he says. I'm Lazarus because I'm back from the dead. Hitler's back from the dead. He's a chaplain now, and they're embracing him. And this is traced to the liberal dependence for lifestyle on clinics that practice birth control. So in Mike Johnson's mind, evidently, Gaza is formulated to make liberals face the truth about the sacrifice of fetuses. So they don't want anybody to come clean about that, because many of the people who advocate for abortion rights were in on it. Biden was in on the whole thing. Paul McCartney was in on the whole thing. It's not so much true theology on their part as a convenience. It's sort of a there story by Adolf Hitler's savant to his perplexed junior. And I think the way to go about getting our hands on this is to understand that they postponed addressing the environment so they could use the environment in what is known as a forcing house. It means times when you're forced to do something that you'd rather not have to do. Gandalf said, all people who live in these times wish they didn't. Forcing house is an expression found in A Time for Greatness by Herbert Agar. And they're forcing acceptance of something like Gaza to show the way that the mind of the common man trivializes the suffering of others. And the answer to this is very clear. We need community colleges, we need housing, we need to facilitate return to subsistence farming, sustainable development, we need health care. We don't need all of these missiles and excuses for dropping Buster bunker bombs on tents, which is as inane a thing as has ever been done. And this is the reason why I don't try to answer this on to someone who asked me this on Owen Jones's YouTube channel, because he will just take it down along with my sheer misery regarding what my peers have delayed addressing so long has been visited on Gaza. But the point I'm trying to make is that when the supernova was moved, it was moved from a signal that Egypt had Hamas ready to launch. The Palestinians had nothing to do with the supernova rave. Nobody in their right mind believes they did. The good people of Gaza had nothing to do with the massacre of the supernova rave, any more than they had anything to do with the supernova, the supernova down here the rave massacre in Seattle, or the Ripper murder Bruce Harrelson and Beanies came up with. The poisoning me in the mouth for looking at pornography, which shows the advocacy of the Black Panthers in Seattle for Donald Trump. That's what it shows. People like Owen Jones can't have that. People like Robert Kennedy don't want to be unmasked as a Sabine woman. Paul McCartney doesn't want to be unmasked as helping Reagan pull Lenin's Houdini, so that the people who they execute as superfluous, as unneeded, as extras on this set, don't get the right impression about who actually was behind it. Blame Jimmy Curry and let Yoko Ono come on with some of them really pimping Japanese hotties, man.